Hello everyone, today we read the 7th chapter of the 3rd book of von Clausewitz Vom Kriege. Its title being Perseverance. The text follows. The reader expects to hear of angles and lines and finds instead of these citizens of the scientific world only people out of common life, such as he meets with every day in the street. And yet the author cannot make up his mind to become a hair's breadth more mathematical than the subject seems to him to require, and he is not alarmed at the surprise which the reader may show. In war, more than anywhere else in the world, things happen differently to what we had expected, and look differently when near to what they did at a distance. With what serenity the architect can watch his work gradually rising and growing into his plan. The doctor, although much more at the mercy of mysterious agencies and chances than the architect, still knows enough of the forms and effects of his means. In war, on the other hand, the commander of an immense wall finds himself in a constant whirlpool of false and true information, of mistakes committed through fear, through negligence, through precipitation, of contraventions of his authority, either from mistaken or correct motives, from ill will, true or false sense of duty, indolence or exhaustion, of accidents which no mortal could have foreseen. In short, he is the victim of 100,000 impressions, of which the most have an intimidating, the fewest an encouraging tendency. By long experience in war, the tact is acquired of readily appreciating the value of these incidents. High courage and stability of character stand proof against them, as the rock resists the beating of the waves. He would yield to these impressions, would never carry out an undertaking, and on that account perseverance is the proposed object, as long as there is no decided reason against it, is a most necessary counterpoise. Further, there is hardly any celebrated enterprise in war which was not achieved by endless exertion, pains, and privations. And as here the weakness of the physical and moral man is ever disposed to yield, only an immense force of will, which manifests itself in perseverance admired by present and future generations, can conduct to our goal. So this is an inspirational but nevertheless very concrete chapter about the value of perseverance, right? In the many parts of the Vom Kriege up to this point, we have seen how fundamentally there is a physical conception that von Clausewitz applicates to this world, realizing that human nature is fundamentally more prone to, stasis per se. We are kind of tending to idleness and then to laziness, especially when things seem to go better, whereas this is a very relative situation, and we are constantly immersed in a reality that is so overly complicated that, everything could happen to wipe us out from a moment to another, and we wouldn't even be able to predict that. So von Clausewitz, if you have followed the series, gets to this point, naturally showing also, and he has reiterated in here, how fundamentally war is that situation, right? That they mentioned, what do you want to call it in this way, that confronts more directly the individual with this astonishing need for, I would use, more vulgar terms, let's say speeding up as much as he can, right? And therefore, getting through this reality, the concept of the chapter naturally is about perseverance, this thing that must be mostly, constant over time. But the point is that this constance cannot be achieved if there is not a strong motivation at the base. That must be, for this very reason, going through this very complex set of occurrences, by a robust perseverance per se. A motivation that doesn't fade on the long run, right? That can't keep you go, right? And von Clausewitz here says even when things basically are going wrong, right? And they will, guess what? They will always go wrong, because there is not a single thing we do that effectively happens in the way we foresaw that. And von Clausewitz explains us that in war, this is at the maximal. This dynamic goes at the maximal of its intensity, right? Because these are enormous systems that fundamentally operate under an enormous pressure, an enormous stress and threat, right? And they are reacting realities, moral forces, human beings that are risking their lives, right? And therefore there is no other human business in which this realization that the perseverance is fundamental to everything we do is more evident, right? As we have seen, von Clausewitz can easily be read just also as a manual of like a life coaching, we could say, because objectively these are not conclusions that von Clausewitz gets to just by isolating war from I couldn't say from reality, because by definition von Clausewitz doesn't do that, and it tells us all the time, but also without detaching war from, in fact, the human experience as we know it. And even in the examples that von Clausewitz makes, like in this chapter, for example, as he has already done multiple times with professions, but with jobs, what apparently normal people can get into, and making us relate to that more easily, to understand what war really is. And this is particularly important because if we stand to the formality of the Vom Kriege, right, this is a work that is specifically dedicated to warfare, right? So that von Clausewitz fundamentally talks exclusively within that boundary. He also explains us naturally how war interplays with politics and society, but he never steps out of that. And yet at the same time, he makes us understand how war, exactly through this method, through this dialectic, how war can never be detached from reality, because war works in reality, and it doesn't make any sense to create a theory art of war that basically takes out of the equation the enormous difficulties that we're confronted with in any real context all the time, right? It doesn't take to read von Clausewitz to know that life is difficult, right? And it's not difficult, however, and this requires an important kind of intellective realization. That is, it's not difficult much because of, I don't know, this morning, I don't know, you fell and, you wish it didn't happen, right? It's difficult because there is a set of circumstances that you can't foretell, that you must have a vision to scope in their, useful, practical dimension, say, for you, like to get through the thing in a more effective way, and therefore it's also enhanced by the amount and the greatness, let's say, better, of the enterprise that you undertake. This is also quite importantly what von Clausewitz says. War is obviously one of the greatest enterprises ever, right? Because it can even be a small thing, but if you are involved in it, you have still a pressure that makes you realize how important it is. Like, it's not a chess game. Yeah, it's something that entails, like, human life, first of all, is at stake. So von Clausewitz makes us understand through the lines, I would say, that if you look at how life fundamentally works, and how even this professional examples can show you more easily, the greater the enterprises, and the more you need perseverance, right, and the more you need this magnanimity, we could say, in the Latin sense of the term, that is, this enormous capability of undertaking all these difficulties, these hardships, the sufferings, not just for yourself, but because there is a collective responsibility in this all, because war is a political act by definition, and because wars are fought by societies. So everything, has a very important consequence in here. And this really makes you understand also the the spiritual dimension of this work, because it makes you really touch the dimension of the moral resources that this thing requires, right? If you occupy yourself just with silly stuff and you don't undertake anything greater in your life, you will not get to the point, because it will seem to you that after all, life is just about a bunch of things that you have to keep under control, and everything is fine. A person that just looks into politics or war or society cannot, if either he or she really wants to understand it for real, cannot have this mental attitude, because this mental attitude is contrasting with the complexity of reality, right? And the point is that if you do not acknowledge, you do not want sometimes, which is most of the time, I think the majority of the cases, to accomplish this complexity, to acknowledge this complexity, and you think everything can effectively get down to very few things, you are an irresponsible individual. This is the point of the story, right? You can't pretend that just by minding about your business you will get better, right? Von Clausewitz is not a it doesn't enforce this collectivist thinking. He simply says, okay, you can be whoever you want, but just bear in mind you could get into something like war, and at that point, what really you wish you had done was to understand much better what the hell was going on in the first place and find a solution for it. That war in a way imposes you, right? At least as an attempt, right? You can be wiped out in the process, but this is still what your brain will be spinning around when someone is pointing a gun at you, right? And therefore this acquires all a great ethical dimension that cannot be put aside, right? If you wonder why, what von Clausewitz is, here he answers actually the question here. He says, if you pretend here that I'm going to trace a mathematical formula that you can go waving around saying, this is how it works, you're wrong, right? And you're not wrong because I'm not capable of finding a mathematical formula, but because it is impossible by definition to find a mathematical formula for determining essentially a moral reality, right? That is the one. The clash between war is a clash between moral forces primarily, by definition, and what really works, right, as a behavior, not as a formula, is to realize how much moral force you need. So it's ridiculous sometimes to see how many people still criticize von Clausewitz for no reason, right? Because this, anti- or Clausewitzian attitude, it's something that developed over time by chance, we could say, of people who came later who thought they were better and that for no other reason basically started criticizing this mind, and they failed badly, right? As an intellectualist failure, and on a double plan, because first of all, you can't resolve war intellectually, right? And secondly, because this is a work that you must understand intellectually. So the point is, if criticized von Clausewitz, you fail at both levels, because you fail to understand there is not just intellect, and you fail to understand what von Clausewitz actually said, which is crystalline clear if you actually bother yourself to study the work, right? So it's actually embarrassing how simple, let's say, von Clausewitz is to learn, right? It doesn't take an enormous much. It would take, of course, certain specific consequence, also possibly a linguistical expertise in German at least. But even if you actually, if you read it, maybe not. But if you study it, just as we're doing now, right? That you can't really understand what the whole deal is about, and the criticisms being done especially by culturalism, right, is simply deriving from the intellectual deficiency in understanding a text that is very simple to learn, very, very simple, right? So And this all once again starts from simply saying, okay, I presume to know better without even understanding what this is. Why? Because I'm better, right? It's a form of narcissism, right? And narcissistic people are fundamentally mentally disturbed people. So we must acknowledge this, that exhibitionism, as a, for the sake of it, for saying, oh, look, why I came out with the new thing that will revolution everything, as if nobody ever thought better than you, because, you're so special. This is how we're growing people, unfortunately. At this point, everybody's special. Guess what? No, not everybody's special. Actually, most people are very lame, to be honest, just as in terms of minimal human, intelligence standards of evaluation and, just elementary decency. People don't like to make effort. People don't like to applicate their mind. They're lazy, right? They're just people who stay there parasitically, doing nothing of their lives and complaining about it. And this is the reality of existence. And that's why they don't understand the Vom Kriege, because if they just studied it, would get to the same conclusion that of course perseverance is important, that you cannot live a fulfilled life if you think that you cannot have long-term goals and achievements and an energy take on life, right? To try to do your best in a world that will bring you down at some point, that will oppose itself, will make you live through struggle. What's a life if not this struggle, right? What is it really, right? How can you feel a better person, a better individual, better human being if you don't even make an effort to put yourself into, hardships to get something greater than you thought it was possible to achieve? It doesn't make any sense, right? And von Clausewitz is pretty clear about this, because you see, he's not doing this for a purely philosophical reason. He actually doesn't care. This thing is all aimed at a practical use, and he got this through a lifetime spent in war, fighting for his cause, for his country, for his beliefs, right? For what at the time drove a man of his background, and that made him live through the pains of hell in this regard for it. So this is the story of taking things with the amount of seriousness that intelligence should suggest you. And it will be intelligence that will, if not give you the moral resources you need, but at least will make you understand enough to make you appreciate the greatness of what is going on in the world, and how you can partake to it, and find within yourself those resources, right? This is something that can happen really to anyone. You don't have to be, in fact, special, as they told you must be to be. So we can all do it, because as human beings we can achieve that. The difference is that people will not even mind to do it, because they don't care. They don't even know what it is. And others will understand that. Others will get to that point and will have the strength to undertake this, and not to, and already knowing that the difficulty is always behind the corner. That this thing doesn't get without sufferance, without setbacks, right? And also without failure in a measure in this regard, because that will happen. We know that from life in general. So von Clausewitz writes, the reader expects to hear of angles and lines and finds, instead of these citizens of this scientific world, only people out of common life, such as he meets with every day in the street. Right, so once again, von Clausewitz uses fundamentally a scientific, axiom to describe usually the topic of the Vom Kriege. He speaks often also with physical metaphors. He really wants to give us an asymptotic vision of the world, but only to stress that absolute, that extreme, it cannot be reached by definition, and that yet everything can happen and does happen in between, right? So the point is also that moral forces and many other factors, of course, for our sheer gnoseological problems and limits, cannot be achieved. Mankind cannot understand the universe. There is nothing to do with that. We will never get to that point. It's by definition impossible. But this has nothing to do with what you can accomplish in between, right? And the same goes for pretending to measure moral forces, right? You can't do it scientifically. You can't do it. And von Clausewitz, however, tells us that there is a human sensitivity that can get us ourselves used to appreciate these forces for what they are, not measuring them scientifically, but essentially just venturing in the world as we know it, as humans, right? War is fought by people. War is not an abstract entity. We're just humans doing stuff, right? That's literally what war is, nothing else. So if you take out the human factor out of anything, at every moment you try to dehumanize a scenario just to pretend that because the human factor can vary, so I do not consider it. So what do you project this thing for, right? And this is the constant erratic mentality we can't get detached from. This fact we do not want to admit the greatness of humanity in this case, right? If you not get to the absolute, it's lame. Guess what you have? Humanity. And you complain that you cannot get to the absolute, to the extreme, while you have humanity. That you're an imbecile, right? There is no other way of putting it. There is no other way. Believe me, you can try to find every other escape route. It doesn't work. There is no way out of this. And this is what von Clausewitz really wants to make you understand. That humanity and a world that is impossible to understand scientifically is all you have. So you don't have any option but to try to cope with the two things at once and get the best you can achieve, right? And the results are not going to be that bad all the time. On the contrary, if you follow this thing, you can achieve those great successes that we all praise in a way. And in fact, he writes, and yet the author cannot make up his mind to become a hair's breadth more mathematical than the subject seems to him to inquire, and he is not alarmed at the surprise which the reader may show. Right, so it's interesting because also the same von Clausewitz, so preemptively the difficulty that the average reader would get from this. Right, what do I read a book for if it's not mathematically certain that what is written is true, right? Unfortunately, even with history, there are people who reason like this. That is to say, basically have no idea what history is in the first place. And von Clausewitz, the fact that he was already aware of that at the time, right, it puts him ahead, even of all the criticism, already by definition. That is to say, I know that you will not understand. I know that there will be a prejudice against this, because it's instinctive, it's automatic in a way to reason like that. When you're at a low stage of understanding, where you don't see the complexity in a broader spectrum, you will think it's really about that. You will think that it's essentially those 1, 2, maximum 3 factors that will make the difference, will make you look cool, sophisticated, intellectual, because it's more than one factor, right? It must be like 2 or 3, yes, and what all the other infinite ones that always exist at every single moment, that surprise, we don't even know what they are from a strictly physical point of view. Just like consciousness, for example, and intelligence and moral resources per se, how can you quantify, how can you define what they are in a scientific computation of reality? Right? It doesn't work. It's uncomparable. Every scientific projection goes away. There is no way to make it, right? And once again, this is. I know the next person will come and say, you know what, because you need to know about the reality, you need to know about the technology, you need to know about the numbers, the quantities, the hard facts, right? You must know about the geography of the situation. You have to be concrete. You have to be aware of a lot of things. But this has nothing to do with you understanding what will happen for sure, because that's another thing, right? You can understand better what will happen beforehand, but you will never be sure that the thing will go up that point in the way you plan, right? And this is not to say that overwhelming odds can be reversed every second, but still, in proportion to those odds, things will go, right? Will go in different ways that you had not foreseen even for those odds. And the fact that we realize that these odds are, like most of the times, is actually the proof that we are able to accomplish a great deal, even by reasoning in non-scientific terms in that regard, in non-absolutistic terms, in ways that leave open the path, right? So abstractions of every kind, which is the army that wins the most, let's say, if it's more or less paid, or if it's on the defensive or defense, as if these were actual dimensions you could extraneate from a real option that could present every possible scenario, right? And I know I'm radical about this. I know the fact that I insist a lot even to bringing this thing to the other extreme, but this is the point of this work, right? That every time you give up even an inch to the other perspective, you're basically polluting the analysis, right? You're trying essentially to bring in that determinism that, by definition, in reality does not work. This is the point. Then Clausewitz goes on and says, in war more than anywhere else in the world, things happen differently to what we have expected and look differently when near, to what they did at a distance. So, from one side, these were, actually the first one is a motto that was known since classical times, right? The fact that in war, the outcome is probably it's actually the most distant on average to any other enterprise, human enterprise. The second is also very fascinating, and it has to do with the fact that very often when we study military history, we think that more or less we know, right, what war is because we are experts. We've read a lot of books. We know better. We know what it really is a battle, right? No, we don't. We don't, right? And this is not valid just for someone that has never been in combat, never seen a person exploding in front of his eyes, or hasn't suffered the enormous deprivations of psychophysical traumas, right, and all this stuff, but also because what we eventually learn from the history, from the war that has already happened, so from military history in these terms, is simplified. It comes through a filter that is built, right? It's not projected through a scientific mean. It's basically historical stuff. It's basically social sciences on imperfect information that has nothing to do with science, if not by method, right? Not by contents, right? So war in this regard is, even for the commander-in-chief that is not on the battlefield and just gets reports from the battlefield, unintelligible for what it really is. And don't even think that participating to a battle makes you actually understand everything that happened, or that keeping track of it would even be meaningful at some point. Same from Clausewitz says, everything gets down for the sake of intelligibility of this stuff to very few points, to very few elements, right? The theory of the art of war has to be as light as possible. Obviously, this is also impossible by definition, but this is the asymptotism of the Vom Kriege, that is to say, okay, the more you want to know, the better it is, but always take in consideration that also what a soldier is, or an officer for that matter, the commander-in-chief is required to know to win a war, cannot be, a lifetime of studies. It is what that person needs, that let's say enough, that good enough, that is required to make the thing at the moment, and for a situation that is by definition different from any other that has ever produced and anything that will produce will be ever produced in this sense. So this makes you really understand how even the thing gets overly complicated, aside from the sheer scientific realization, right? From this sick attitude of pretending that everything get down, after all, to to simple factors that are certain, right? What you need is simple factors that, however, are not certain. They are factors that you have to play with, to weight yourself when you're there, and that may be wrong as far as we know, right? But that maybe can give you that awareness about the fact that certain things can happen, at least in similar ways, and everything is up to your discretion, right? Then von Clausewitz goes on and says, with what serenity the architect can watch his work gradually rising and growing into his plan, right? That is easy, fairly easy, and it's not that architecture is easy, right? But at least, you have this plan, you know more or less what this is going to be like, and the work is making it basically how you have planned it, right? And you can literally see that the structure, rising over time during the construction. Then von Clausewitz makes the example of the doctor, that although much more at the mercy of mysterious agencies and chances than the architect, still knows enough of the forms and effect of his means. Right. It's also interesting because medicine is very fascinating in this regard. Not everything has a tag, right? Hormones do not have a tag. Illnesses are very often, manifesting themselves in, even in combination with others, biological factors, and you don't really know, right? But still, the doctor knows enough of the forms and effects of his means. That is to say, I have a set of of things I can diagnose, and then eventually I will respond to that, trying to fixing the thing with the means that the medicine has produced that are basically the same, right? There can be an art in that too, but it mostly has to do with getting the point right. What kind of illness is this, and why is this body reacting in this way? Then I will choose an option. Don't you know exactly what it takes to do? In war, it's not like this, because in war, you don't even know what you need to do most of the times, and most of the times you don't even have that evidence that is needed to take a decision, right? In fact, von Clausewitz writes, in war, on the other hand, the commander of an immense wall finds himself in a constant whirlpool of false and true information, of mistakes committed through fear, through negligence, through precipitation, of contraventions of his authority, either from mistaken or correct motives, from ill will through a false sense of duty, indolence or exhaustion, of accidents which no mortal could have foreseen. Right? So in war, just imagine you're a commander, right? So you are in a whirlpool, first of all, of false and true information. This is very important. We've seen how war is a political act. So even when we talk about fake news in political reality, we're essentially talking about how can we control the stream? How can we check the information? How can we be fairly, usefully sure about this? This is already a problem. It's not even about getting it completely right. We live in a world that essentially gets informed in ways that are very partial, and this is not because of the world we live in. It's because of the reality we live in, because that's how we read what happens, right? These are imperfect means by definition, and here in war The point is that you're not analyzing what happens, 20 years later, and, safely, reading stuff from your chair. But you're in this constant whirlpool of false and true information. You're tempested by this, right? You don't even have the time to verify what the whole thing is, right? Then there is the mistake, right? Mistakes that can be committed. Maybe you're not even responsible for it, but it can be committed by everybody who has a power in this thing. Through fear, can even be the enemy in that regard, and that you will have to be able to exploit possibly. Through fear, think about the fear. Think about what is at stake, right? You're making that you must act there. You can't really say, I don't know enough, so I stop here, as von Clausewitz wrote later. This thing must go on, and there is no way you can stop it, because even if you say, okay, I'm out of here, still this thing will crumble without you, and it will be even worse, and you will get responsibility of it as well. You maybe even die. Through negligence. That is not just even, it's maybe even laziness per se, just saying, okay, yeah, I don't want to do this, I don't care. Then it turns out that was an important thing, and say, and thing went seriously bad, and you have to cope with this now. Precipitation. At the same time, as we've seen, the thing must go on, so you feel pressured by this thing. You feel you must take action, because what will all the others think of me now, right? This situation changes. It's difficult. It's dangerous, and I must show confidence. You take a decision that is wrong because you didn't reason the given time, or at least you wasted it because you're too anxious, you can't focus, maybe you're tired, you haven't slept, right? And this will have other consequences that all together will create other problems that will amplify and that may overwhelm you at some point. Of contraventions of your own authority. People will say, no, I don't want to do this because I think this is wrong. What do you do there, right? This is a human. You're not just someone, in a simulator, like telling a machine what to do. You're telling to man to go die for your intuition, right? Then the fact that these contraventions to your own authority could be wrong, and therefore you even know it, and you must spend yourself to make understand why it's not the case, or maybe because, and you cannot know really the difference at some point, that this criticism is right? And there is ill will, true or false sense of duty, right? And duty is also a problem. Don't think that, also historically, think about duty in the 19th century. 19th century was the century of duty, right? You must do this because it's your duty. Right, in the 20th or in the 18th, it wasn't really like that, right? Duty existed, but there was not this overemphasis. Think about all the certain even styles of fighting. You can plenty of examples. Think about the Prussian infantry advance during the 7 Years' War. This fact that they would prefer even to get shot down in greater numbers, even be defeated, just because they had to maintain the same pace, while they could have run towards the enemy, maybe to overwhelm them. No, they had to make the same pace because they had to, they had been told to do so, and there was no way they could take an autonomous decision. This is a bit more of a complex thing, but it was still sense of duty, and that was naturally already like a primitive way of thinking, if you want. Indolence or exhaustion. People are lazy, or just they're not motivated enough, or maybe they're just exhausted. They're tired as hell. They can't perform that. So you have to even to measure this. How do you measure exactly whether your troops are, how much they can give in those terms, right? Or accidents. That's how von Clausewitz puts this, that no mortal could have foreseen. That is to say, how could someone think that, I don't know, that bullet would take down that messenger at that point in that place for that accident? How can you foresee that. It's impossible. You don't know. You throw yourself in something that constantly doesn't present you enough reliable data to understand clearly what's the next step you have to take at all times in war. So you can understand from here what's the level of here von Clausewitz doesn't actually touch the issue, but there is also this important realization that we've seen other times that has to do with the fact you're fighting against an enemy that is in the same exact condition, right? So in part, actually these problems level themselves, right? That is not that there are campaigns, there are even disasters in the ways they are led. There are terrible mistakes, but nevertheless they're victorious because maybe the enemy has done worse, or because simply you are too strong anyway, you are at a greater advantage. So this doesn't mean you can't do anything about it. And what truly matters at this point in we approach to perseverance is exactly this prolonged commitment that doesn't fail behind, under your feet, and makes you go on no matter what. And von Clausewitz writes, in short, the commander is the victim of 100,000 impressions, of which the most have an intimidating, the fewest an encouraging tense, right? This is also particularly important because there is a psychological dimension, of course, as you understand, as we've seen that the moral forces are the most important ones after all, and all these difficulties will have an impact on your mind, and most of this stuff is actually negative, right? And this is true in life as well. Like all we do is constantly is getting constantly attrition by lots of problems, and essentially we leave most of our lives to fix them. Right? There are just a few things that we can say, oh wow, this is really nice and positive and I'm happy about it. Then eventually you have to get back to fix other problems. There is legitimately also not just a physical laziness, right, that derives just from physics, right, because we can't do more than much and this thing tires us, and yet the world goes on. It's immensely stronger than us. This affects our motivation, right? And von Clausewitz says, by long experience in war, the tact is acquired of readily appreciating the value of these incidents. High courage and stability of character stand proof against them, as the rock resists the beating of the waves, right? So war is the place where there is definitely the greatest trial to these feelings, and the whole structure, even of armed forces, is designed even to act in that under that psychological point of view, right? Don't think of armed forces just as a set of numbers and of just an ascetic training. Everything is built historically for making yourself trusting. The man that stands next to you under fire in most difficult situations, and the esprit de corps, as we have seen also in previous chapters, is of dramatic importance in this regard. It stems exactly also in here for putting pressure on you, right? If you want a counter pressure, think about discipline and how it's imposed sometimes. It's if you disobey, you go under martial law. In certain circumstances, you can actually be shot down legally, right? So this generally doesn't quite work, right? An armed force must be motivated to act. You can't just shoot at people pretending that they will become soldiers in that regard. Also, you can't break people's spirits in that regard. You can't just make someone obeying passively. There's a group dynamic that must still keep alive your motivation in this regard, because you have to be, as we have seen in the previous chapters, fully devoted and committed to, let's say, unleash from within yourself those resources that are needed to go on no matter what, under the toughest and most horrifying of the situations. And this is not something you say, okay, I can do it, because until you are not there, you cannot say you can, because you don't know what it is. You don't know what it feels like, right? Fortunately so. But we don't have to underestimate it either when we are studying in, talking about things that should also have an effect on other people for the better, by pretending that we do, and that after all you know how it really is. Because what we really lack most of the times in understanding war is not knowing the numbers, not knowing the data, is not knowing the doctrine per se, or everything that is strictly just I would say pertaining to the armed force proper, as an instrument, right? But we must understand the moral dimension. We must understand what motivates these people, right? War, as always, has more to do with how much you are driven to kill the person in front of you than whichever other factor, including weaponry, including any other material element that you can find. Well, and this is probably also one of the most difficult things to understand. That it's not that other problems are not important, but there is always a set of conditions within which war breaks out, right? It's not a system that works on its own. It stems from politics. It stems from society, right? And within these all, there is conflict as well. A common mistake it is done is confusing the term conflict and the one of war. War and conflict are two very different things. The conflict is what brings motivationally to two people to decide to clash in a way or another, and doing it eventually with violence. That is when war breaks out. But in here, you must understand what is the push that would make a person undertake that path, right? And going on all the way through, up to the point he can. And war is this testing ground for determining. In fact, war also is better at doing it, right? Desertions in the beginning of the campaign are normal. The experience, as we've seen, there is a military virtue that gets developed over time, and by sheer practice as well. And because sometimes it's just even a matter of trivial things that altogether will make an impact, right? But they all depend on the motivation of the individual, right? And von Clausewitz says, he who would yield to these impressions would never carry out an undertaking, and on that account perseverance in the proposed object, as long as there is no decided reason against it, is a most necessary counterpoise, right? So perseverance is more than like the motivation per se. Is realizing that you have a purpose that goes beyond even the objective that you want to achieve, right? Because we also have difficulties to understand what consequences a certain achievement will bring to us. We can't expect something. We can't say, what if I do this, right? And start wondering what it will be at that point, and what the advantages that you can think will get, but it also could be different, could be even more than you thought. So perseverance stands into a much deeper ground, morally speaking, than we can imagine, right? Thinking of if something is worth it, for example, how can you really measure that? This is also an important question, right? How can you decide how much for a person something is worth, right? Given that everything stems from also a gnosiological approach to reality, how, what is the price that the person would give to something? Not everything has the same price for different people, right? Actually, very few things have, and this is also what free market is really about. How can communists pretend to give a fixed price to, one thing for all people is also what it makes it probably one of the greatest shames of the history of mankind. Yet perseverance is what you need to counter these difficulties, right? This is really what makes it all worth in a way. Because you're standing against adversities will get you this incredible capacity of standing against many others and, getting ever more in this way. It's something you must be trained with. This is why at the beginning of the video I was stressing the fact that if you really don't bother yourself with, important stuff, you can't really even get unimportant stuff done. Right? It's an important level of scale, of levels. It's really a great difference. This is probably what, mostly, socioeconomically interpreted way of looking at society. We forget that there is a, spirit within our capacities, that we don't grow, right? We think just, statistically, or I'm just, we're, it's weird. Like they tell us we're special just for doing nothing, but at the same time, we are also told constantly we're part of a bigger system, and that we also are within, and we're kind of comparable, right? It's pretty weird. But maybe one day we'll have to analyze this concept per se, the consequences, the ramifications of this concept at least. But I'm not capable, I think. But generally speaking, it really reflects the mediocrity of the whole thing, right? Someone who can't even be tricked into, believing two different things at a time, because, after all, what your potential is doesn't care for you at the point. You don't even, bother yourself being picked on by these ideas. So there is a devastatingly courageous view here that basically makes you running after chaos, right? But getting stronger out of it if you don't get crushed in the process. And whatever the motivations are, because you must get motivated. I mean, you can't do it just as a sport, right? You must accomplish something that has also, that requires a discipline to attain. I mean, that's why the example of war, right? And we're shifting it towards every other, because the one of war is the most devastating. It's the one with which any other cannot compare. And von Clausewitz says further, there is hardly any celebrated enterprise in war which was not achieved by endless exertion, pains, and privations, right? Stressing this fact that war is an unspeakable horror. And he goes on and says, and as here the weakness of the physical and moral man is ever disposed to yield, only an immense force of will, which manifests itself in perseverance admired by present and future generations, can conduct to our goal. Right. So, as we've seen also in the previous chapter, von Clausewitz brings this thing to a collective level as well. Right. This is not individualism. This is really understanding that this greater capability of this collective discipline also in capacity of undertaking accepting serious challenges, right, is part of the collective development of the role, right, of a state, of a country, of a nation, right? And in war, right, a country finds in fact its greatest cohesion in ideal terms. Like the concept here is not that countries should make war to be better, but that war will come to a point, and that a country that is divided in many ways can find around that pressure as many other things. Look, even at the pandemics, I mean, it can be everything, right? Pandemics is not a war. The war is even more challenging, but every time there is a difficulty is that there is a sort of collective spirit that emerges in saying, okay, let's do something that we know, even if we are very individually minded, is important at the end of the day for each other, right? Because without this thing, we could not survive alone, right? And therefore we have to stick together. So the importance of a country is measured also through the amount of pressure and collective answer it is capable of providing, right? This, of course, this has nothing to do with, a magic strengthening formula that will make that country eventually, be special. So, a war, as we perfectly know, can destroy a country, but deeply. Even just after the war, I mean, from a political point of view, the people can hate each other. It can be a disaster, right? But generally speaking, there is a chance that is given at some point to get that amount of discipline that seems to me we're not getting much at this point, right? And we're getting passive at so many levels because we're used to think that all we have achieved is, the consequence of a natural humanity that you can alleged humanity that you can express by hypocritical tweets, just to prove other people that you are from the right side, and then basically doing absolutely nothing concrete to help other people and to help yourself, because it really starts from that point, right? If you don't help yourself, you don't give an example in that regard, very few chances people will understand what you're talking about in the first place. So perseverance, right? Perseverance is really a precious quality. It's really measuring the level of motivation and of belief, and it's difficult to find a person that will take something that far, especially for a very long time, just for an idea that has no good in it whatsoever. I mean, it can happen, right? But we should also not be so paradigmatic towards human ideals, in the sense that it's not that even enormously criminal and cruel things can be done without a lot of perseverance, but at the same time that probably is mixed with something else. So it's not necessarily positive by itself, but may be the product of other dynamics that don't look just at the evil, but maybe at something that can't have another general benefit, right? It's like pretending, I don't know, that totalitarianism can be even hundreds of millions of people will do exclusively bad things. Well, no, right? Every totalitarianism in its obscene criminality has accomplished something, right? You can't look at, I don't know, the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany or fascist Italy and saying, every literal thing that those states did was negative, right? They did gross things that were a disgust, an enormous, crime against the dignity of humanity. But in the first place, but they also did other stuff in science, in technology, in I don't know, in archaeology and stuff here, and in that sense, you must also be able to discern what is in this point, that it's not just one factor, one element, one, let's say, single motivating factor, right? This is also what von Clausewitz says here. Don't think that you can substitute science in a mono thematical approach to how to solve a problem with to the moral forces. You can't pretend that people are, for example, driven all by the same motivation. There is no person in the world that is driven by the same exact thing as another person. Never. It will never exist, fortunately so, right? Because we're all different, and thank God we will always be all different, but we will never be equal by any stretch of the imagination. But that's exactly the point we're making here, is that if you pretend, once again, to have found the magic formula for which this thing will, could be solved, like, just know that that's the best step you can take to fail badly, right, in everything, right? And this is not to doubt, because many people instill the doubt as a form of relativism, right? Not to get to the point, not to get towards at least the truth as such. The doubts must be raised as long as you really lack an understanding about what you're saying. You want to understand it better, and you're able to to give up even your preconceptions to get to the point you really want to know. The point is that this chain doesn't never end, but you still can improve sensibly your understanding through the process. This is, after all, our growth, right, as individuals. This is possibly the greatest gift, as we were saying before, that we have, right? We live in a life that can be horrible, where history is an endless tale of bloodbaths and of cruelty, of monstrosities, right, as we've seen before with totalitarianism. But at the same time, you can't interpret it as if for this reason you didn't have to know it, or it didn't matter, or you can't get any, or you didn't get anything good from. This is the next risk we're facing now, and this thing stems from ignorance, because only a person who doesn't know history can pretend to erase history, right? Because history is such an enormous food for thought that basically it encompasses everything, right? You can't study. This is a difficult. Maybe we shouldn't digress at this point, because also the chapter is ended, by the way. But the fact that von Clausewitz knows that perseverance as also something that will be important for the present, but also the future generations, is very meaningful, because it's really meant to be educational in the long run. And civilization has its own darkness, but it still shows that greatness step by step, and it cannot be concealed, right? Concealing it would take away the capacity of people to look at that and getting driven, and to be as perseverant as the people who preceded us. And this is instead actually what he's getting. We're getting to. People are not perseverant. They're not used to struggle. They don't know even what it is, right? They can't do stuff because they're spoiled, because they have throwaway resources, and the problem is that at some point those resources will end if you don't manage them properly. If you think they're always going to be there, that people will magically leave just because someone pays them a check, they don't even work to get it. Who's going to pay for it? Right, this is exactly where we're heading to, and this is the disease of abundance in many ways, right? We already lived through that. Think about, I don't know, the Netherlands, the late 17th century, right? There is this sense. Think about the Le Mal de Vivre, I don't know, the end of the 19th, excuse me, but this greater, lack, in fact, of purpose and motivation that we're constantly facing, as in fact one of our greatest, probably our greatest challenge at the end of the day, because that's really all where it all starts from, right? If you don't have this will, you can't even get to a satisfactory level of quality of life, but you will not know what to do with that. How many people have a lot and yet they don't care really about it, and it seems unfair for themselves, because they basically given up what they have been gifted by their family, their fortune, whatever it is, to do nothing about it. And it's seriously immoral from that point of view. While we should be always greater as spirits, as souls, it seems to be always smaller in this regard. I don't know, but there is a cure for this, and after all, I'm obviously making it pessimistic by a certain degree. I don't know whether this is actually true. I mean, to me, it is in the sense this would need to a lot of digressions on how much this perseverance is needed for what, how does human mind and activities adapt in this regard. That these are all different topic. Just philosophy. We don't care about it now, but just realize that is by knowing about war that we can get a lot of this perseverance, because that shows us exactly, military history shows us things we would have never thought to learn. In terms of look at how much people can do and how meaningful is that. Or it's not just about reading a weird fact about, I don't know, this cheap news that this site, this blog, I don't know how they are shared at the level of memes, etc. Just look at what people do, right? Not what happened by chance, but why that happened. That is called history. This is not to do with military history, but military history helps you because it provides you with examples that are much tougher than any other situation. That make you really value, especially the perseverance of an act, not the warlike, warrior, immediate courage that eventually cannot be held for much. Also because but the perseverance of an intelligent mind that is able to suffer on the long run so much, just for a purpose that evenly must be carefully understood, even for you as a human being. But anyway, this is just, let's stop it here for now, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.